chief, you took this job eyes wide open. Why did you want it?
I felt that I understood what the department was going through, and that having experienced something similar in Atlanta in late 2000, that I could best prepare the department for the roadmap forward.
What did you foresee would be the difficulties taking over here at this time?
Oh, the racial divide, and I knew that the fact that I was coming in and white would understandably be a flashpoint, and also just the distrust between the communities here, the black and white divide. So I knew I was going to have my hands full, and all the time the violent crime is through the roof. So how do you focus everyone's energy on tackling violent crime when you have all of these emotions that are simmering?
Do you think there's a connection between policing and racism?
Oh, I know there is. I know there is. I mean, I employ human beings. They come to the table, they develop inherent biases. Data supports that all day long. I think it's important to distinguish that that's not saying police are racist. I think that what happens is we focus on the end result and not the process. So we justify, all right, we're going to stop these motorists because we know we've had carjackings with black drivers. Well, you can't do that. You can't compromise the process. And it's when we don't police equitably across communities that we find ourselves in this space.
How are you addressing that here?
The first thing is you have to be candid in your discussions. And yes, it's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable for black people, it's uncomfortable for white people. But you have to call out behaviors, and you have to present data, and you have to show this isn't right. And have these conversations about what we're doing. And I think, most people, particularly white people, are not aware of what they're not aware of what they don't know. I don't think most people go out intending to discriminate. I think that most people just are not aware that their actions are having that impact on others.
We talk about building trust between communities and police. Is that too high a goal? Trust, given the history you described?
I think that's an ideal. I think what I look at is, I can do interviews all day long, but at the end of the day, LMPD will be graded on how we perform. And it is imperative that we perform at a professional level, day after day after day. Trust, I hear you, but we go back to the 60s, and who's on the horses beating black people with a nightstick? Who's got the German shepherds biting black people who are marching? It's white police. So trust would be fantastic, but I would be happy if they would just feel a sense of, I want them to be able to at least come to us and ask for help. To
build that relationship, though, it appears you're going to have to reconcile the Breonna Taylor death. The justice system declined to prosecute anyone directly in her killing. How do you move past that to find this equilibrium?
Breonna Taylor's death is sickening. And I think for Louisville, it was the tipping point. There had been a number of factors in play already, and this was it. This was the final straw. I sincerely hope that the FBI in their investigation might close some of the gap here. I have very real concerns about how the warrant was drawn up, because I do think it's a miscarriage of justice if you can be in your residence, shot and killed by law enforcement, and no one's held accountable for it.
And until that happens, if it happens, are you somewhat limited in how far you can go in trying to bridge the divides?
Typically that would be reasonable, but the violent crime here is my primary angst and heartburn. And the reality of it is, we're at 66 homicides. I'm dealing with 80% of them, at least, are young black males. So the reality of it is, we just have to do our job, and we have to show, to me, the most negligent thing we could do is not be aggressive in solving these crimes because our victims are young black males.
You're not a prosecutor. You can't affect a prosecution in the Breonna Taylor case.
I cannot, no.
Do you have to explain that to people sometimes?
I think that there was a time here that probably others had to. By the time I came, I think it was very clear of that they weren't looking at the police department for the prosecutorial piece.
Now you've got the federal government looking at patterns and practices
Yes.
in this department, and you've been pretty open and supportive of that. Let me ask you this: is this police department broken?
No, let me tell you something. This police department has an extremely strong culture and positive culture. There are multiple practices that are broken. And where I see that what has occurred here has been an absolute abject failure of leadership. And it has allowed for these behaviors and these shortcuts to occur. But there are good people here. We have absolutely room for improvement. We have to do things differently. But I feel as though I have a team that is on the cusp of being great, and I'm going to get them there.
The Justice Department will do what it will do in looking at this department. But sitting here right now, could you tick off what's wrong here?
I went through this in Atlanta. When there is a lack of strong leadership at the top, it allows for corners to be cut. And what I see occurred here was a lot of processes that became the practice, and the culture, the negative components of the culture overrode policy. And so I think that people need very clear and want very clear direction on how to do the job. There has to be a very high level of professionalism in law enforcement, which means holding people accountable, which means we can't always rationalize and tolerate our colleagues' behavior. You know, when employees engage in sexual misconduct, fire them. When they engage in excessive force, fire them. I mean, but we have a tendency in law enforcement to say, well, you know, Bob's a good guy, rationalize it. And we don't have that space now. And the worst thing you can do as a chief is allow an individual or individuals to compromise the integrity of the entire department.
But how much are you willing to give up? As the feds come in here, do you find yourself having to take a step back?
No, not at all. In fact, what I would say is I have to work with greater urgency while the DOJ is here, because what we need to show them while they're looking for patterns and practices is we're changing. Not just changing on paper, but that we're really changing how we're doing things, because that will make a marked difference in whether or not we come under a consent decree, and God forbid, if we do, how quickly we come out from under it.
Is this a community you think that really wants to heal?
Oh, absolutely. And I will say this is the one thing that I've found has really given me a huge amount of optimism here. You have a community, whether it's City Hall, Council, the business community, that are investing large amounts of dollars in fixing things through crime prevention programs, social services. We had an outside audit, Hilliard-Hines report done before I came. There's a huge amount of concern and energy towards getting this right, and people are backing it with dollars, which is what is necessary in many of the cases that surround people who need really social services far more than they need police.
You have been described as a police reformer. Do you accept that role? Are you a reformer?
You know, I think absolutely, I'm a reformer, and what I'll say is a number of my colleagues that are major city chiefs are as well, and it's essential for the space that we're in. We're behind. We're behind.
We've seen so many cases of use of force, excessive use of force around the country, and a greater willingness of leadership to call out the wrong. We've seen cases now go to trial, not all, but some. Do you think as a country we've hit a turning point on this, that this idea of reform is now more broadly accepted?
I believe so. I think that last summer what we saw was really unprecedented, and it's imperative that we keep the momentum going in driving change. We really weren't paying attention to the plight of others. You know, if your world is good, it's easy not to look at the person next to you. And I think for many Americans, especially white Americans, last year really brought to the forefront for them that many people were being discriminated against and had far greater obstacles than they had ever realized. If it's not your world, you often just are oblivious to it.
You have a community here that I guess you could argue was wounded. The entire community suffered after the Breonna Taylor killing. You come in as an outsider. Was that a wise move?
Oh, absolutely. I think, you know, and having been in law enforcement and had an outsider chief come in, there do come times in department's history where it's essential they have an outsider come in, and I will say for LMPD, that was essential at this time. Now, the next chief, no, but right now for where we were in the distrust and the numerous things that needed fixing, yes, it was essential.
How do people reconcile the fact that you left the Atlanta job days after a controversial police shooting to land here in a city still reeling from a controversial police shooting?
It truly depends on the person you talk. So for instance, in Atlanta, I didn't face the criticism that I faced here at all, because I think there was a broader understanding of my leadership and what the incident itself. I think when I came here, there was an enormous amount of criticism from some sectors, which I understand, and that criticism I was open to, listened to, but then there comes a time that I'm here and I'm going to do business, and we're going to get a handle on the violent crime.
Putting aside the DOJ, I think it's fair to say a lot of the country is watching the experience here, what happens after the Breonna Taylor case. Do you feel that pressure to make change quickly?
I feel the pressure only because of myself, the pressure I put on myself. It's really important when you get to this level that you tune out the noise and the distractions. I'm on a mission. We have to reduce violent crimes, and I need the department focused on doing that, everybody, and it requires an enormous amount of accountability, overhauling the department. So what I'll say is there's nothing out there that is going to be any more weighty than what I'm putting on myself each day.
There's been a lot of data compiled about this department, the officers. It appears the majority of the officers, if they could find another job elsewhere, they would go. What does that say to you?
Well, I think first off, I'm hoping that the percentage of officers who are disgruntled is not quite as severe as it was when the poll was done in August. But in saying that, I still recognize that policing across the country has become wholly unfavorable. I mean, it is extremely difficult to hire. We have to rebrand ourselves. We've shot ourselves in the foot repeatedly through poor decision making. So from that, I will say LMPD is not unique. So what I need to focus on is my employees, putting my arms around them and saying, I support you. This is a wonderful job. It's a difficult job, but I will back you. But I'm going to hold you accountable. And it also means fighting for their pay. It's an argument people don't want to make in this space, because I think you think that, well, okay, we're under the gun, so we probably shouldn't be arguing for pay. But the reality of it is Louisville is facing unprecedented numbers of homicides and violent crime. Somebody, the police, has to rein that in. I need officers, talented officers, to do that. I cannot afford to lose the people that I have.
So you want to support the people you have?
Oh, I absolutely support the people I have, and I support the fact that I need them to stay here, and they should be the best paid in the state of Kentucky.
You've been here since January.
Yes, sir.
Give me the wins. What is up? What's better?
I do think the morale is better. I think that we're starting to see with the community discussions about how to move forward, as opposed just to looking backwards to the anger of last year. It's not to say that people still aren't angry, but you can go to the table with the different activists, community groups, and identify a path forward. I think that there is an understanding that this alone, where the space we're in, is not going to be solved through policing alone. I mean, police will be the first ones to tell you, you have to address the underlying problem. And that is it's typically socioeconomic. And so if you're not investing in programs that support and help people navigate out of poverty in particular, of course that we're just going to be in a cycle of prison. So, what I see in Louisville is there's a huge amount of money and energy being focused on addressing the underlying drivers, as opposed to just saying, put more people in jail. That doesn't work.
You were police chief in Atlanta when Breonna Taylor was killed. Do you remember what your reaction was based on what you had heard?
I remember when I started reading about it, literally being heartbroken. It sickened me. And then I read the entire investigative file was released, and it was just sad, because it should not have happened. It just should not have happened.
So you say that, and you acknowledge it, but then people expect you to be able to do something about it.
Well,
what are the expectations and what can you do?
what can I do? I can ensure that this department polices differently. I can ensure that when people commit infractions, they are held accountable immediately. And more than anything, it's saying, you know what, how this was done, whatever your rationale, it was a failure. And the department has to be committed to improving and doing things differently.
What did you learn about the history of Louisville, the racial history of Louisville, that you knew would be part of the issue as you try to find some understanding?
I think that what stuck out to me was the dramatic divide in the city. It reminded me of Baltimore, where there's a very bright line between the black and white, the have and the have-nots, and it's very troubling when you don't see that, when you see that level of separation and the lack of economic involvement in the depressed areas. But the upside to that is I think this last year has really brought attention to that, and you're seeing a lot of energy in the city around changing that, and that's huge.
You've mentioned a couple times an increase in shootings and homicides. Did I get that correctly?
Yes.
What do you attribute those worsening violent crime numbers to?
There's a number of factors that have driven violent crime across the United States. I mean, it's everywhere. And what I will say is, first and foremost, the most obvious that no one ever wants to speak to is the proliferation of illegal weapons. I mean, you can't shoot unless you have a gun. So how is it that there's 12, 13, 14-year-olds with guns everywhere? And it's not coincidental that there's far more shootings and homicides in the states that have lax gun laws. So I think there's the obvious. I think that the fact that COVID has shut down schools, Boys and Girls Club, after-school programs, kids have had nothing to do. I think that you're looking at folks who are already on the margins, and this past year has thrust them even further aside. So they're struggling to survive, and if you have nothing, yeah, of course you're going to break in a car and steal a gun for 25 bucks. Why wouldn't you? You have nothing. If you have no hope, you can't expect someone to rationalize the legal consequences if they have no hope. So I think there's a number of drivers, and it's a complex issue. And I think until the United States treats it like the crisis, the physical, the true health crisis that it is, as opposed to just a policing issue, but says, no, this is really a health crisis, similar to when cigarette smoking, we came to the conclusion, oh, cigarettes actually really aren't good for you. I think until we all get our arms around that and start marching in one direction, it'll be very, very difficult to change the trajectory of violent crime in the United States, actually.
What do you tell this community your goal is?
My goal is we are going to get a handle on violent crime, but we're going to do it in a fair and impartial manner. This is not just throwing spaghetti at a wall and saying, hey, yeah, let's go police and lock a bunch of black people up. No, I don't subscribe to that. I never have. It's intelligence-led policing. It's going after known violent offenders, and it's holding them accountable. But we're going to do it in a manner that we would be proud of, that we would not be embarrassed to see on the front pages of NBC Nightly News.
You've got a civilian review board now. Is that helpful?
Well, they're just getting started, but I think I think it's important to have. You know, first off, it has a couple of the protest leaders on the board, which I think it's important. It's important to hear from all the communities, but more than anything, if people are not comfortable coming to LMPD to file a complaint, I need them to be comfortable going somewhere, because I need to know if we're engaging in misconduct. Can
you give me your reaction to the Justice Department review?
I fully expected that the DOJ would be coming. I hoped that they wouldn't, but the reality of it was I expected them to come, and so it's largely what I planned on.
You said you hoped that they wouldn't?
I hope that they would not. You know what? My hope was that we would not go under consent decree, because I think it's an enormous financial lift for a community. But I also understand that sometimes it's absolutely necessary. So I did expect them to come. I wasn't sure in what platform they would arrive. So they've come to look at patterns and practices. I think that's fantastic. I welcome the help in vetting out anything that we're not aware of. That being said, it's really important to me that when they conclude their report in 6 or 9 months, we have things on track and can stand behind the work that we're doing.
Can you guess what's going to be in that report?
Yes, they go back 5 years, and I think it'll mirror to a large degree what the Hilliard-Heinz report put forward, and that is a disparate number of traffic stops on black motorists, a lack of hiring a diverse pool of candidates. I think it'll be some I anticipate there won't be a number of surprises there. It'll just reinforce much of what we already suspect or has been pointed out already.
Do you think it'll send a shot across the bow of other police departments that may engage in similar practices?
I think that your major city chiefs are already attuned to this. You don't get to this level without knowing that you're being looked at closely. I think for me, I have always had I won't say more concern, but it's always concerned me the smaller departments, the medium-sized departments that I think are engaged in much more egregious behavior that are never called out, because I think that can just absolutely devastate a community. I remain committed to the fact that the community here and the police department, they're not content with the space that they're in. And that's for me is fantastic news, because the worst thing that you can encounter is apathy.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.